Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode number 52 of the CreaPact podcast. My name is Neel Patel. I'm your host for the pod, and on this pod, we combine creativity and impact in hopes to give more than I can get. And today, we have an incredible person joining us on the pod. She is a Tedx speaker, a self discovery mindset coach, an author of a book called Beyond the Skin, known for her incredible mindfulness and manifestation techniques, helping people find their inner peace, and a host of a top 30 self discovery podcast called Conversations with Nistha, and one of my first friends in the content space. So, without further ado, please welcome Nistha Dube.
Hi, Neil. Thanks so much for having me. I was just going to say, we met back when you and I both were in early days of
Yeah.
building out our personal brands. I want to say it was like 2020.
Yeah, I think that's when I really tried to make the shift in trying to do something like a
hmm
podcast or something like content. And then I kind of just didn't do it. I had a bunch of like fear-based stuff, and then you started doing it, and I was like, you know what? Like this past couple months, I was like, I just gotta get started. So, um, first off, again, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're a busy person, and throughout this past week, ever since we scheduled this, I consumed a good amount of your content. You're big on manifestation of your reality and finding purpose and things like that. And I think we do share like some similar passions, like teaching, speaking, being real and authentic about our journeys. So I'm going to get right into it. I always like to ask a question that just helps me connect with the person I'm talking to. What is something that you're struggling with right now?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny that you asked me that today because today's been one of and I think I've just been going through ups and downs and figuring out my personal brand and what direction to really gain more consistency and clarity on for a while now. And so I have days where it just all like the intrusive thoughts and the lack of clarity really get to me. And today's been one of those days. So um, I don't know, it's debilitating. Like sometimes it really like takes over me and I get overwhelmed. And more specifically, what's coming up is just a lack of not even a lack, actually. I think it's an overwhelm of options because I'm just
Mm-hmm.
someone, and you might relate to this, who's really multi-hyphenate. And so I enjoy doing a ton of different things. I'm good at doing a ton of different things, but I'm not a master of one thing. And so, as people could probably tell with that intro, it's like I've dabbled a little bit into each of these areas of if you want to call it building out a brand or modalities for sharing my message. But at the end of the day, it's like if I had to pick one, I don't really know what that would be. I don't really know what that looks like, and that's the stage I'm at right now in my business and personal brand is honing in on one of the many things I've started. And so that's where I'm struggling. There's like a fear I have of almost missing out of other things if I
Mm-hmm.
do pick one. And so that sometimes really stunts me, and I just get into this place where I freeze and I don't know what to do. And so today was one of those days. Yeah, and that's something I haven't really shared openly yet. So I'm glad you asked that.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to connect with someone, just asking, what they're struggling with, what they're vulnerable about. And I think your journey is one that's, super interesting. So, I did a little bit of, homework, and I know that you have a really cool journey. So I know you're a TEDx speaker. Of course, you've written a book, which I know was written in like 9 days, by the
Oh
way.
my gosh, wait, how do you know that?
um,
That's
and you have an amazing business that I want to talk more about later. So I have like a bunch of things that I want to dive into, but I think it'll be beneficial for a lot of the listeners of this pod, because a lot of people I feel like today are in that figuring it out phase, especially people like in our age, like Gen Z, even millennials. So if you can tell me a little bit about your story, where it first started, and what got you that itch of potentially starting that like content journey.
Wait, if I can ask you, I'm just curious. Do you
Hmm.
want to share with your audience what you're struggling with as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I've been struggling with right now is kind of figuring out why I'm doing what I'm doing. I think we all get into that like self-doubt type of stuff, right? And it's like the thing where we all want like results quickly, but the idea of like staying consistent for a very, very long period of time, I think there's something super fulfilling about that. And the reason I struggle with that is because I've always struggled with consistency in all aspects of my life. So this podcast for me, um, although I've been consistent for like 50 straight days, I still have that like, or 52, I guess, when the people are listening.
Which is
But
incredible.
yeah, so and I'm on a journey to try to do it for a whole year because, but yeah, I think that's what I've been struggling with is that, and then also a bigger thing is like now that I'm doing this, I have even if like many people don't listen to this or if I don't have a big following yet, and I'm sure you can relate to this is like practicing what you preach. I think that is very important in anything. So I think that's something that I'm struggling with right now because it's like, oh, Neel, remember you said this on this pod, but why are you doing this right now? Or like, why are you like, hey, hold back on this? Like, you don't have like this isn't a replication of like who you are when you speak to your people. So I think that's something that I'm struggling with
Yeah.
right now.
No, thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to ask because, like, at least something that I do in my podcast is I love keeping it conversational, and I just wanted to like explore that
No,
added layer
absolutely.
to what's going on with you because it's like I think we all have that vulnerable side, and a lot of people are really scared to let it out, and especially with you and me putting our work out there on social media, I think it can be really easy for people to hear that you've been doing your podcast for 52 straight days or hear, okay, this girl put together this book in 9 days and think like, damn, like why isn't it clicking for me like that? Or like, why can't I do that? And I think it's so important for us being in this space right now to be like as raw as we can about the fact that we're going through it too. And it's just a matter of
Yeah,
finding what clicks. And I don't know. I don't know for either of us if, we can say we've confidently like found that thing, but I think it's the figuring it out phase that's honestly been like the most beautiful part of it for me.
it's like the just take it one day at a time type of thing. That's literally
Totally.
it. And no, you're right. I think on a lot of my podcasts, and I don't know if you've listened to any, but like I'm very like vulnerable and open about the things that I struggle with about like my life and my family and stuff like that. And I'll get into it a little bit based on some of the questions that I'll ask a little bit later. But yeah, that's some of the stuff that I'm struggling with right now. But if you want to just give like a brief rundown of like your story and how you got into that content journey, I think it would be great because it took me literally like 2.5 years to even like press record. The fact that I'm doing this right now is crazy, right? So if you wanted to like share that journey, that'd be great.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm just so happy for you because like I know we've kind of both had our own journeys with social media and just to see you like be here and be doing this so consistently, I'm like, that's amazing. Cause I still remember our early conversations. But yeah, I mean for me it was 2020. I was a senior at Virginia Tech and I think today, actually yesterday, marked 3 years from
Woohoo!
when the pandemic turned everything into like a whole virtual, almost like metaverse type.
Hot mess.
It's just yeah, totally sideways. So that's what I was like. Okay, do I really want to do the things that I have been saying to my friends that I want to do? Like I was going to job fairs, I was applying to consulting jobs, I interned at a tech company the summer before and kind of had a full-time job offer interview on the table. Those things were right in front of me. And the first time that I had stillness was literally when this pandemic forced us to be in our houses. And I was like, okay, great. I have nowhere to escape right now except for just being with my thoughts. And so that's when it got louder and louder. That little voice in me was like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? And I'll be honest, ever since I was little, and this is a little intuition hack that I tell people to do for anything. But if you were to ask me, okay, Nista, envision your dream life, like what are you going to do when you grow up? Envision yourself 15, 20 years from now. I was always on a stage with a mic in that vision every single time. Every single time it was that. I was on a stage with a mic and it was like different stages around the world. And so I'd just be like on a little airplane flying in different places. And that was it. It was that vision every single time. And so I was like, okay. And obviously, I didn't really give that vision much power in high school or college. I wasn't really spiritual. I'm saying spiritual in quotes.
We'll get into it.
We'll get into it. Yeah, you know what I mean. At that point in my life either. So I never really honored things like this little intuition hack that I just shared.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2020, at that point, it was just coming to me. Like I was not even actively trying to be a spiritual person, but it was like weird synchronicities were just happening in my life where I would read things on Instagram and then it would happen in my reality. Or I would literally, I used to laugh at astrology. I used to laugh at like the idea of synchronicities. And then it was happening to me. Like there were correlations that were just uncanny that were happening in my personal relationships, that were happening in my career life, to the point where I was like, okay, there's some truth to this. And so at that point in my life, I was at home and I was just literally meditating. I was asking the universe for signs. I was journaling. And the first thing that came to me when I asked the universe for a sign, I'm like, what do I do with my life? Within 10 minutes of asking that question, I sat down to eat lunch, and my uncle was visiting that week. And he's very, very, like probably the most spiritual person I know, in the sense that this man meditates 9 hours a day, has dedicated
Wow.
his whole life towards spirituality. He had a PhD in polymer science, polymer chemistry, sorry, from NYU, and turned it all down to do this with his
Wow.
life. So he is intuitive to a next level. And he sat me down and he was like, he had no idea I asked for a sign. I did this in private. But 10 minutes after that, we sat down for lunch and he goes, so by the way, like, have you considered speaking? Like you've always had it in you. Like, are you thinking about that? And I was like, this is so bizarre, because like he knew that I was also applying to jobs in the consulting tech space. So for him to just say that out of nowhere was, it's really weird. And then I was like, okay, cool. Don't really know how to get into the world of public speaking. How does one do that? Don't you have to have like a book or a PhD in something? Like
Right.
I don't understand. And so I was just digging through like all of those online free workshops that all those entrepreneurs and coaches put out. They're like, sign up for my free 1 hour, blah, blah, blah. And,
Yeah.
and I was like, I need this right now. Like I never think that people should shit on those things, because like there's so much value in those workshops when you're first starting out and you have nowhere, like you have no idea where to go. And so I was just signing up workshop after workshop after workshop. I'm like, how did these people get to 6 figures running their online businesses or getting on stages speaking to schools? So one of my first ones was Jess Ekstrom. She's a really awesome public speaker today, goes to schools, goes to universities, and she shared her first story of speaking at a school for free, where they literally offered her a slice of pizza in exchange for her time. And then the next talk that she booked, I believe they paid her $2K. And so
Wow.
that was her jump. And I was like, okay, there's something out here. I need to crack the code. And that's where content started. So
That's
I was
awesome.
YouTubing twice a week.
That's
Slowly
awesome.
went into TikTok, podcasting, and everything just kind of unraveled from there.
What is your main channel? Because I saw your conversations with Nissa channel. You have one other one, right? You have two, right?
So are you talking about my YouTube?
Yeah, yeah,
Or
your YouTube.
yeah, so what happened with YouTube is I don't remember why I started a brand new channel. I did that on accident. Something happened. I did not mean to have like a separate YouTube channel. And
Yeah,
I think I have my old one, which I don't use anymore. It's inactive. And then I
right.
created this new one and I can't remember what I created it for, but I
That's for your
just made it.
podcast, no?
So I made it that now because
Oh,
I don't know why. I think I was either trying to start fresh. I think that's what it was, because I think this one is linked to my business email. And so I'm like,
gotcha,
cool, I'm going to do all my YouTube stuff here. But then
gotcha.
my last one, I still kind of already have my like somewhat of like a base and like videos out there. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to make this exclusively my podcast. So I still have to update that page. Yeah.
Gotcha, gotcha. No, that's an amazing story. I think COVID and throughout that time, I feel like a lot of people were in that space of like, what do I do? Where do I go? And that's when everyone was home on their TikTok feeds, Instagram, and stuff. So I think the idea of wanting to do content, I feel like may have gone through a lot of people's minds, but I think actually stepping into that is something that's very hard to do, but it's so like fulfilling once you actually do it. And I think you'll actually enjoy this because I'm sure like you talked about one of the what was her name, Jess, what was it,
Extra.
Jess Ekstrom, right? So I recently went to a Jay Shetty live show.
No way. You
He
went
came,
to Love
Love Rules.
Rules.
Yeah. So I went to that
Amazing.
on Tuesday, and I was like, dude, I can't wait to talk about this with her, because some of the exercises he did, some of the stuff that, like, the crowd work he did with people.
Hmm.
Where are you based out of again?
So I'm currently right outside of DC, Northern Virginia.
Yeah. So when he comes down there, you have to go. It was life changing. Like,
I've been
I'm not.
hearing incredible things, and yeah, definitely been considering it.
Yeah, so and I know, because a lot of the stuff that he talks about, when I first started like wanting to do meditation, it was in, I think it was like March of 2020, so like right when I moved back home after like COVID happened, from like
Hmm.
out of my university back into the parents' house. And that's when he was doing like those 20-day challenges of like live meditation every day.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's when I started doing that. And I've been super inconsistent with meditating, but I think it is such a cool form of spirituality, finding stillness and all that. So I think that's actually what I want to move into next, is because I know you're huge, and honestly your entire brand is based off of the mindset, spirituality, and manifestation. And I was watching one of your TikToks because I wanted to just like find some stuff to specifically talk about. And there was one TikTok that you made, I think it was like early 2020. And the quote was, "You are not your thoughts and emotions, you are just the observer of them." And I think that was a very, very powerful thing for me, because I think spirituality, and maybe you can help me out with this, is, for me it's so many things. I think for me it's about finding stillness amongst the craziness that's going on in our life, whether that's going for walks, meditations, long drives. For me, what I found, cold showers helps me a lot. And me growing up my entire life, I've always had a family and a household full of like conflict, drama, like lots of emotions and frustration. So I noticed I would get like angry really quickly, I would get frustrated really quickly, and it was hard to find that like neutrality in your emotions. And I think for anyone who wants to like get into a spiritual journey, and I want your take on this, cuz I think shifting your mindset, the first shift you have to make is like admitting to yourself that, hey, like, I need to fix this. Like, I want to gain more control over my emotions, and I have to make a change. So I wanted to ask, like, how do you think people can cultivate that like positive and growth oriented mindset when they know that, hey, my emotions, I tend to lose control of them pretty quickly?
Hmm. And I think it starts with even the latter portion of that question where you said, how do people develop a positive mindset, right? I think there's so much of an emphasis in this self improvement space to be positive, to develop a positive mindset, to develop a growth oriented mindset, when really, and I think you even said this in your question right now, I think the goal should be to be at the neutral place, should be at the still place. I don't think the goal, at least in my opinion, is to be positive. I don't think the goal is to be even growth oriented. I think the goal is to actually be neutral. And
Really?
so the way that I see spirituality is actually it's funny when you're talking about stillness, the first word that came to my mind is connectedness. That's how I see spirituality. So I used to see it as stillness and almost like self-isolation and going inwards.
Hmm.
And now I see it as the opposite. I see it as that's still a huge part of the journey. And that's usually when people discover spirituality, they're led to this like very still, internal, almost isolated space of being. Once you've done that and you've discovered that and you've harnessed your power, you're back into the world, into the 3D reality, connecting
Mm,
your power, you're integrating your power, you're integrating your learnings, your insights, your wisdom with society around you and with the people around you. So that's how I see spirituality. It took me a very long time to learn this, to realize it's actually about connectedness. And
interesting.
so in terms of tips that I would give people, I think it goes back to the quote, right? There's an element of awareness and observation that must be developed. And that's like a muscle that you got to practice every day. So meditation, that might not work for people. And I honor that. If that doesn't work for people, then find what does. For some people, it could be as simple as like a somatic movement. Like every time you're noticing you're going down a spiral of thoughts that you don't want to have, right? That's another thing too in spirituality. Typically, I've noticed that we avoid labels of negative or positive. So I won't even say negative thoughts. I'll just say unwanted thoughts, right? Thoughts that you don't want to have in that moment. Maybe they're intrusive, they're not conducive towards a goal that you're trying to get at. So you're in that spiral. Let's say you're like, okay, no, like screw this meditation stuff. I don't want to do this. You can do something as simple as like snap your fingers and say stop. It's called the stop method, and typically a lot of NLP coaches use it. So you're basically synchronizing right now your body and your somatic movements with your brain telling you to stop the thought. Again, this is a muscle that must be practiced and developed over and over. That's just another method that people can do that's really quick, that's really easy. You don't really need any tools for it. Journal. One of the quickest ways is when your thoughts are just 180 miles per hour. Just get them out on paper, and you'll be surprised to see what happens. So, whichever modality you use to develop this first step awareness doesn't matter as much as the fact that you have developed the awareness. I think that's where it begins. And so once you can do that, I like to do a few different things there for like the second step. I either like to label the situation, and this is something I learned in psych, is that sometimes labels and labeling certain situations or people in those situations, if they're really bothering us, can actually be super helpful. So if you're, let's say you're angry about things that happened a few years ago, certain people in your life, I learned this technique is that you can actually label the people in those situations with just one single word of a positive quality they have. So this is more psych. So that's why I'm using the word positive here. Like if they're kind, right? You can go ahead and label them as, oh yeah, they're a really kind person. It comes, this tool is only used in specific cases, and it doesn't take away what they've done to you. It doesn't, bypass your healing in any way, but it's just a quick method to help you process and help you, also become open to the other side of the situation of things that have happened. So that really, really helped me when I was going through specific things with family members who weren't understanding what I was doing. I felt a lot of constricted energy. I used that with my family members. But another thing that I really like to do also, so we talked about the labeling. I'm losing my train of thought. I had it right before I went into that. It'll come back to me.
No, it's all good. I think it's super valuable, like those like tips and tricks that you've been giving. I think that led perfectly into like what my next question was like, do you have like any, I think you named off a couple that would be good for like anyone who's just like starting the spiritual journey, is like that's like the phase that I'm in. Like it's like the same thing with like the labeling. It's like sometimes like I don't know what to call it, right? Like I can call it like a spiritual journey. I sometimes like to take on the idea of just existing and just like being in the present moment, and whatever that I'm thinking, whatever that I'm going through, like I love to tell myself the idea of like this too shall pass. That is very helpful for me. So you yourself though, like do you have like any like non-negotiable best practices that you do like almost on a daily basis? Because in the beginning of the pod, that question, what you're struggling with, you mentioned, today was like, one of those days where lots of stuff going on. So what are those best practices that you do that helps you stay in that space of, neutrality and peace?
Yeah. So for me, at least, my one non-negotiable daily that happens without fail is I need my daily walk in the sunlight, out in the sun. I need it. I will. I can't do without it. So that's just me, right? And I think I encourage people watching this to also go look at their human design. If they've never heard about it, you can just Google human design, totally free. It's probably the first couple links that'll pop up. It's basically combining astrology with the chakra system, with different psych assessments as well. So if you've taken like the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram, it's kind of a combination of all of those. It's really common in the self-improvement and entrepreneurial space right now, but it talks about basically your body's main way to best check in with itself and its intuition. And so mine is actually movement. So when I go out and I walk, that actually helps me more than sitting and meditating. That honestly helps me more than sitting and journaling. So I think, again, I encourage everyone to look at what works for them, because it could be totally different for your body type versus mine, but that's my non-negotiable. And in terms of people who are getting into spirituality, I think the first thing that comes into mind, 2 books, The Untethered Soul, and then Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. So those are,
That's so
you've probably
crazy.
heard of them.
I
Yeah.
literally, that's so funny you mentioned the Power of Now, because the Untethered Soul, I was recommended by one of my like previous employers back in like 2020, or 2021 actually. But the Untethered Soul, great book. The biggest takeaway I had from that is just like the idea that when thoughts are coming, we have barriers, and you have to let your thoughts get past those barriers. And when they don't, thoughts get created around those thoughts. So as like that was like the biggest takeaway. The Power of Now, we have this thing at work. Like I work for a software company, and once a month we have this thing called CEO roundtables, where the CEO would like sit down and in groups of like 50 or 60 people, and we would just like ask him questions. And one of the questions was about like self-improvement and life hacks and stuff like that. And The Power of Now was one of the books that he recommended. And I can't say his name. What's his name? Eckhart. What is it?
Eckhart
Eckhart.
Tolle. Mm-hmm.
Eckhart Tolle. Yeah. So I actually have that book being shipped to me like as we speak. So I'm super
That's so
excited
funny.
to read that.
You'll love it.
But yeah, I think you mentioned the walk. For me, it's and I'm gonna get a little bit personal here, but the first one is I have to take a cold shower every single day, and it's two things. One, it's like a great reset for my mind, like in terms of whatever anxiety I'm feeling or whatever thoughts that I'm having that are, like you mentioned, unwanted, right? When I take a cold shower and like that shock I get from my body, both like internally. Our CEO, he said that and when you take a cup of coffee, a cold shower is like a cup of coffee for your entire body. So
Mm-hmm.
for that, it's like I'm immediately in a positive mood. And the second thing is I'm not going to do anything harder the rest of the day. So that's like a big win for me. And then the second thing was before I like walk into work every day, I like sit in my car and I close my eyes, and for like 5 minutes, I just like do like a gratitude prayer where I say everything that I'm like grateful for, and just like envisioning like positivity into my life for whatever it is that I'm doing. So if the day before was horrible, I still just try to find the gratitude in anything and everything in my life, and that always helps. But yeah, I think that was really valuable. Do you
Yeah.
have like any when you deal with like self-doubt? I think that's a very big one for me, because I think it's very easy everyone to like doubt themselves. So like for you specific, like how do you deal with it? Like is it just like through your non-negotiables that you do, or like how do you go about it?
Yeah, self-doubt is an interesting one, and I honestly think that the journey in combating it for myself is something I more so developed only once I started to take action. So what I mean by this is, like, you can read all of the self-development books out there. You can consume all the literature, you can work with a mindset coach, you can do your daily like affirmations, whatever. And this is where it shifts for me from new age manifestation, and why I don't resonate with it as much, is that you can only rely on your actions more than anything else you do. You cannot place so much power and so much dependence on affirmations to give you what you want, or manifestation rituals to give you what you want. And so something that I really like to teach, and what I do with clients, is like almost like organic manifestation. It's coming from within. So when it comes to self-doubt, the only and the best way that I've conquered that to this day has been doing the thing anyways. And so Brene Brown and Elizabeth Gilbert talk about this all the time. Brene Brown talks about it in her TEDx, and Elizabeth Gilbert in Big Magic. Fear is always going to be there. Like the people who've made it in this world have made it with with fear. You take fear alongside you. Brene Brown always says, like, I just take it in the back seat with me of the car when I'm going on a new journey. And then Elizabeth Gilbert's like, yeah, fear is like my partner. It comes with me everywhere, right? It's there to protect you. It's not like some people just magically have less fear than others. Sure, some of us might have more fear in certain areas, right? I don't want to be ignorant of people's like traumas by saying that statement, or assume that people are all coming from the same level of privilege, because I know that's not the case. But fear is just such an innately thing wired within us evolutionarily, that the only way that you can conquer self-doubt is by proving yourself wrong. I've made some content on this that I might have taken down just because I took down so many of my old TikTok videos that were
Really?
like low quality, or I had this whole like this purge where I was like, I just want my TikTok to look super
clean.
clean. And so I have so much like good content that I need to.
Your Instagram is looking really good, by the way. Like,
I'm trying. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, the feed is amazing.
I just did a photo shoot, so go follow me, guys. But anyways, so I only started believing in myself when I was still showing up, even though I was terrified. Whether this meant a YouTube video, whether this meant a TikTok, whether this meant a cold DM to a public figure to be on my podcast, whether this was me literally filming in public and not caring about what people said. I had to actually do the thing, whatever the thing was. I had to do it.
Right.
And so it's like, yeah, I had my affirmations. I was still doing them every day. I was still journaling, but that didn't really, and sure, I'm sure on a subconscious level, those things were helping, right? Because those practices have scientific, scientific support for how they actually work, but it didn't compare to when I actually just did it and showed myself that I can, and I proved myself wrong. Because by doing the action, what you're doing is basically negating all of the narratives that your brain is telling you about yourself, or has told you about yourself for so long, right? For me, an example of that was growing up, I was always quiet in school. I did have social anxiety. I was scared to speak up. And so that was a narrative that my brain created about my entire identity, that Nistha has social anxiety, Nistha is shy, Nistha is introverted, Nistha can't do content. But then what did I do by starting all of this? I told myself, Nistha can do content, Nistha can talk, Nistha is comfortable sharing information with people. I started telling myself new stories about my identity. So that's the most important, is that you have to create new narratives about who you are.
That's awesome. 100%. I think that's a beautiful answer. And I think that's super valuable, because before I actually got into this pod, I had because this was the first time I was actually interviewing someone, right? And I was like so nervous, and I had nerves, and I was taking deep breaths and stuff like that. But I was but when you're actually in it, when you're actually doing it, right? All those fear-based things that you have, they just immediately go away. And that was the same thing I dealt with. I tell myself you have to keep the promises that you tell yourself. And when you do that, all the fear, all the self-doubt, all that other stuff, it goes away, because you're doing the thing to do it. And you're not doing it for any external benefits or rewards, or there's this great saying where it's if you live for the cheers, you'll die by the booze. That's a great saying. That's a great saying that I like. So you're just doing it to do it. So
right. And hey, I almost love that you said that, because it goes back to the beginning of our conversation where we talked about neutrality, right? Because so many gurus and monks share that as well as advice for people who are in the entrepreneurial space, is don't be so serious about your work, or don't make it a much bigger deal than it is. Don't inflate your results. If you can be in a neutral position about anything, even your successes as a successful entrepreneur, you made your first 7 figures. Okay, cool. That's awesome. Celebrate, be grateful, but don't make it a thing.
That's it.
That's it. Move on. Keep going.
That's so of course we all know who Drake is. I was watching a podcast of his, or not a podcast, an interview, and it was I think it was 12 months ago, but he had this super interesting saying, and I always in the back of my head with anything. He goes, whenever I have any sort of success, right, I celebrate for 72 hours, and that's it. Anytime I have something that like is negative or anything bad that goes on in my life, I can only dwell on it for 72 hours. That's it.
Wow.
So like, and I don't know, like the way I think, the way he like carries himself and like the way he speaks, I think it's so, he's just like such a laid back, humble dude. And I think it goes back to that. He's not too high or he's not too low. He's just there.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, perfect. So before and I know you're passionate about this next topic that I'm going to get into, but really quick, you can make this as short or as long as you want. What makes you lose your cool nowadays?
Oh my gosh. This is like one of those things I want to answer in like a one word. I'm like trying to think. Lose my cool.
If you
Oh my
don't, that's
gosh.
cool.
I almost feel like this is such a selfish answer. It's because I'm living at home with my parents now, and I'm an only child, and so
Yes. Oh my
they
God.
baby. Are you an only child too?
Yeah. So I have a older, she's like 11 years older. She was like, so my dad's like first wife.
Hmm.
My dad had my sister, with her, and then with my mom now he had me. So, but like my sister's 11 years older than me. So when I was growing up, she was like in college and med school doing her thing. So I feel like an
Right. So
only
you're
child,
essentially an only child.
essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I have friends with that type of age gap with siblings, and they're like, no, I identify with being an only child. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
you act
Essentially.
like you give me only child energy. I don't know. It's this weird only child thing where I can just like sense it in other people.
Yes.
But I think because right now I'm this lost, I don't want to say lost, but this place of trying to find more clarity, like what I shared in the beginning of the podcast in terms of what I'm struggling with. And now that I'm at home and I've been living by myself prior to coming home, it's just the littlest things, right? It's
Dude.
like my mom babying me or being like, "Oh, let me come cook for you." It's the
Yeah.
sweetest thing, right? Like it's so sweet. But something in me is just like, okay, no, let me just figure it out. I'll do it. I can cook for myself. I can clean for myself.
It's
Or like my dad being like, your clothes are everywhere. I'm like, I'm gonna clean my clothes. I'm gonna clean my
dude.
room.
It's like so relatable because I moved back home too in November of last year, and same thing. It's like, hey
Where were
Neil,
you before? Were you
so
in
so
college?
so no, so
Or
before I was actually living with my sister for a little bit of time because like she had a room and like had everything I needed, and then they had like another kid. So then I came back to my parents. I was actually gonna buy like an apartment or a house, but I was like, let me just come back, like save some money, spend time with my family because that's more important. I'm only 21. I have all the time in the world, right? So, but that was the same thing. I moved back here and it's my mom, my dad, and my grandma. And my
mhm.
mom and dad are fine. It's mainly my grandma. Like she will like come in, like be like, hey, you want like chai? And I'm like, no, I'm good. Like I just had one 3 hours ago. Like and and literally like before this pod, my dad came down. Literally, the clock was at like 7:54, which was like a minute before you said you were gonna join. And he comes down and he was like going through the fridge trying to look for fruit. And I'm like, yo, I'm about to record a podcast. Like, what
It's
are you doing?
it's every time we sit down to record a podcast, my dad, like, I literally told him, I'm like, can you just go in the room? I'm filming a podcast. Like, he'll just like cough or sneeze. So, the brown dad sneeze. He does that. And I'm
It's
like,
crazy.
my guests can hear that. My audience can
You,
hear.
you know, even I'm just like, you know what? Just do your thing. Just don't be super loud. If you got to sneeze, make noise. Like, I don't even care at this point. Like, because,
It's,
like,
yeah, literally, I'm like, at this point, I've tuned it out where like you can go through my episodes and you'll probably hear it in a few of them. Like,
yeah,
it's just there.
100%. I think it's just something that we got to live with right now. But transitioning into the next topic, I want to talk about something that I know you're big on because you've mentioned it in the past on some of your TikToks, and just something you're passionate about is our education system and how much it matters like in our culture, like brown culture. I'm sure you know. Um, I'm super passionate about this because I've always been someone who's like been average in school, right? Never like the person who was like the best, but like not someone who was just like was failing everything. Do you have like any specific thoughts on our like current state of our education system and how I don't think it teaches us like the valuable skills that we need,
Oh
just
my
as like
gosh.
how to think, how to read, write, how to speed read, how to think, stuff like that, right? Which I think is like the first thing schools should teach. So I was just wondering if you had like any like initial thoughts on the system before I get into like a little bit of a deeper question.
Do I have any thoughts on the school system?
I know you do. So.
Yeah, like I was a student who, like, the first time that I ever just didn't do well, my brain did not know how to process it. It didn't, right? It was like, oh, you're a failure. Okay, cool. You can't, you're worthless. You can't do anything. That's how I was interpreting it at that stage of my life. So it's a lot of things. It's just, I mean, from an early age, like, we're not teaching students to be aware of their emotions. It goes back to what we were just talking about earlier in terms of spirituality. And where does it begin, right? It begins in the critical stages of brain development, which is preschool, kindergarten. If we were teaching kids to become aware of their emotions and self-regulate their emotions at that stage of their lives, we would have presumably, a really well-functioning society today. It's the lack of the regulation, and I mean, the regulation comes after the awareness. It's the lack of the awareness that I think is why people make so many judgments about other people, why there's prejudice, why we jump to conclusions about other people or create assumptions or create schemas. So I just wonder how different of a world it would be if we incorporated those things in the school system, like mindfulness exercises, meditations after school. There's some states that have started doing it. I'm forgetting which state it was. They offered it to third grade students, and they were already noticing benefits in exam scores, right? And it's I don't know. It's this whole culture now where we're getting kids tested for like ADHD and
Yeah, I think the ADHD thing, like, I used to identify with it, but now I think it's like, I genuinely think it's like BS, because you can teach yourself how to focus. Like, with
I
all this,
definitely,
yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, I definitely think there's because I never also want to discount, mental illness, because I do have friends um who really do struggle with like depression and ADHD, and once they started meds, it really, really started to help them. And so, like, I think there's a lot of value in the science as well. And I think for me, it's like, for a long time, I thought spirituality and meditation could heal everything. And now I'm at a
Right.
place where I'm really challenging that. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if it can. I don't know if that's bypassing. So, I, but I think the culture, like you said, of just now, like, ADHD being so common, and we're getting screenings for it for students at such a young age. And, we have cognitive behavioral therapy. We have all these programs in school. It's, I always wonder how much of it now is occurring in students or in individuals in general, because we've made it almost such a culture. And that might be very controversial to say, but something my parents always bring up is like, they're like, in India, we didn't have any of this. They're like, we did not have counselors in
Literally.
schools. We didn't have therapists. We didn't have any of it. And we were fine. Like, we were good. And so they don't understand when I talk about like therapy and trauma. They're like, what trauma do you have? And, I definitely fall in the middle ground of that, of like, I think the way that psychologists define trauma is just any point in your life in which an emotional behavior was shown to you in which you did not feel seen. So just very basic trauma can be anything as simple as you were ignored at some point where you just wanted to be heard, and that can create trauma. So it's a very, that word psychologically can be used for a variety of different mannerisms in terms of their impact that's been left on us. My parents see trauma as like an entirely different. My mom's like, when I think of trauma, I'm thinking 911. Like, you had a
Yeah.
stroke. Like, I'm not thinking of you like going to, like, she's like, I just don't understand any of this culture. So I think there's an element of like, yeah, I mean, if we were having mindfulness programs in schools at such a young age, um, just our language of mental health. How different would students be acting versus, okay, send your kid to ADHD screening after school, 3rd grade, versus, hey, we're having
Yeah.
mindfulness meditations. Like, how
One,
much does our language contribute to what's happening?
1000%. I think that was a great answer. I think ADHD, like I want to make sure I include this because there are people, you know, who really do go through with like ADHD. The thing that I have a problem with is like I think people sometimes tend to like just blame their inability to like get work done or their inability to focus or their inability to just like sit down and get stuff done to like, oh, I just have ADHD. And like even me personally, like if I'm being like completely honest, like I don't even know what it like fully means, right? Like I don't even know what like that term or like all the symptoms and stuff, like what it really means. And I don't think people do as well, but they just say that they do, and then it's like an excuse to not get stuff done. But I think you can actually train yourself to sit down and get tasks done, learning how to time block, learning how to do tasks in like 20-minute increments, all of that stuff. I think it's really, really important. And I think our entire education system is revolved around like a lot like information overload, and then our inability to like dissect all that information, retain it, right, and actually like comprehend it. Because people learn in very different ways. Not everyone learns through just information overload. People learn through like pictures or graphs or like reading a lot, flash, like all those different types of things. So you talk a lot about, you know, like education reform and that mindfulness and that awareness. Do you think there would be like, have you talked to people like extensively about like this education reform? And if you have, like, how would you change the way like the school specifically, like right now, like how would you change the way they work based off of, you know, your previous experiences and the talks that you've had with other people?
Yeah, I actually spoke to the school county, I don't know if he's, I don't know if dean is the right title. Basically the head of the school county,
Hmm.
here in where I live. And um, I also spoke to a psychologist who was just on my podcast, actually 2 weeks ago about this. So you might have briefly checked
Hmm.
out that
Yeah,
episode as well. And
I did start
um,
watching it. I did.
yeah, and so I spoke to her. I spoke to a couple teachers actually, currently in the school system, just done extensive research on it. And then I've also read another resource, that I really recommend is The Teenage Brain. It's a
Hmm.
book by Frances E. Jensen, who goes specifically into the neuroscience of basically all of the effects of stressing kids out, at a young age. And so part of it goes into stress from school, which is the chapter that I really related to the most in the book. Because for me, yes, I think what was really debilitating was just like, again, I'm multi hyphenate. I'm very creative. My mom forced me to go into like hella extracurriculars growing up. And just each one I did, there was this intuitive ability I had. And this isn't me trying to be self-appraising or like whatever, but there's this intuitive ability I had to just learn and grasp. And I loved everything that I did so much. Um, and so the first time that I didn't do well, like I said earlier in this conversation, I did not know how to handle it. My brain was literally, it had never experienced not understanding something. Like it had never experienced failure. And so to have all of that now, cortisol, and the neuroscience of it is in the book and it's explained beautifully. So I won't butcher it, but to have all of this stress that's being placed basically, um, on your nervous system, can actually deeply, deeply affect certain regions of the brain, which then cause us to lose motivation. And so that's what was happening to me in middle school. And then there was a phase where I had that recur in high school. And I think what was most unfortunate about the education system's response to it is that my teachers at those stages of my life thought I was simply unmotivated. Not that I was going through something much deeper, because I don't think that we educate teachers on truly on what mental health and mental illness looks like. Like, yeah, sure, the ADHD thing is huge nowadays, right? But the actual effects of the nervous system in the brain when students don't do well in school. What does that look like, and how does that show up in our outwardly behaviors? And so I remember explicitly one of my teachers told my mom at a parent-teacher conference, Nistha should thank her team members for the results of the project, because that's the only reason that it ended up doing so well. And I remember at that stage of my life, I was equally contributing to the project. I very much was communicative with all the team members. I wasn't slacking on the team, but my outward behavior in the classroom when I was there in person, I wasn't as proactively speaking up. I was going through a really, really, really dark phase that I didn't feel comfortable opening up to that teacher about. So the fact that I was having the thoughts that I was having at 15 in her classroom, and that's what information was being fed then later to my mom because of her interpretation that I was simply slacking, was very disappointing. And that's basically the day that I decided I'm going to do this for the rest of my life in terms of being an advocate for changing the education system so no student feels that way ever again. So there's a lot. I think the fact that it's standardized and the benchmarks for success are so numeric is a huge one. A lot of schools have now started letting go of I think they completely reformatted the SATs, and a lot of schools have also let go of SATs as even a prerequisite, like a requirement. So there's slow advances being made, but I think I took a class called AP Capstone that was all interactive. It was all research based. We would just pick topics that we cared about and write essays on it, and then go present it at. We did one at the Pulitzer Center for Crisis and Reporting, and one at the Department of Education in DC. And that was like my favorite class ever in my life, because there was a loose syllabus for how it would go, and like loose grading marks, but all of it was based in writing, in research, in speaking, in critical thinking, in response to answering questions. We basically got to present to industry experts at both of these locations. And so getting to network with them and learning how to do that at like 17, 18 is just massively useful. I wonder how different things would be if that classes like that were just commonplace, and like the dynamics of those classes were kind of how the school system today was run.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think there was a lot there to like unpack, because for me personally, when I was in school, I never had like this experience of really like digesting the things that I was learning, right? So when I was in, elementary, junior high, even like some aspects of like high school up until like my sophomore year, I did really well. Like I never had a problem with homework. It was like the same thing like you. Like I would always be able to get things done, never had to like study or whatever that stuff was. And then like junior, senior year of high school came, and then even college, it's like I'm able to do the work, but there's two things. The first thing was like I don't really like understand this, and when I read something, I don't know how to like comprehend it and write about it or anything like that. And then the second thing was like I just like didn't really, this kind of sounds bad to say, but I like just didn't really care for it. Like it was like what am I learning? Like what is this for? Like why am I paying this college money to get this education? And then like the job I have right now, I would have been able to get like that same type of job if I had still been in university, graduated, and I would have been in the same job. Now I have like, 2.5 years of experience. I developed all these relationships and bonds with people at work, and now I can use that experience to go get a bigger, better job or apply it in any way, shape, or form. And I wish schools did a little bit more things revolving around like creativity. I think we as human beings are the most creative like when we're young, and the older we get through school, that creativity like slowly starts to get like taken away. And like for just like you and I, like we're trying to explore that creativity now. The content we make, it's about the things that we are genuinely curious about, the things that we're want to implement our creative efforts into. So yeah, and I think a lot of people want to get out of that schooling system, but it's like very hard to take that jump to like go left when others go right. Right. And it's like the amount of friends that I have that are just like in it for their parents or just to get it done or just to like, oh, I'm just going to get this job and be safe. And the next thing they know, they're going to be like 25 and, oh, you have got to get engaged. So you got to keep that job. So I told myself, I was like, look, I'm gonna like leave, right? And start working and figure out whatever the heck it is I'm trying to do. And I'm slowly starting to get a grasp of it. And my mom always asks me, she's like, hey, like, what's your plan? Like, what's your plan? Like, what are you trying to do? Right. You know how brown parents are. And it's like, mom, I'm just doing the thing that I like to do and living here, spending time with you guys, trying to be present and trying to, hence the name of this podcast is like create an impact. Right. So I just think that's like, why do you think it's so hard for people to like just take that leap to go left when others go right? Like, I just had the idea, like I just did it. And I don't recommend everyone do it. Like be smart with your decision making, right? But I just like dove headfirst into it. So I've
Yeah.
always tell myself is like, just do it, man. You got one life.
Yeah. Fear of judgment. I mean, it's again another one of those. I, I think it's the primary evolutionary fear that we talked about earlier in this podcast. Um, what Brene and what Elizabeth talk about in their books is when they mention fear, I deeply believe it's just the fear of actually just being seen. And if you are seen, then you might be rejected. And if you're rejected, that's one of the biggest threats to the nervous system, just based on evolution, right? In our tribal days. But I I really think that's what it comes down to. I know so many people who ask me all the time, I want to start content, but I'm
It's like,
scared.
do it.
I'm scared, right?
Yeah.
I think it's that simple.
That's
Like,
awesome. I think,
yeah.
yeah, I think it being that short and sweet, like the fear of judgment, that's perfect. I have two more topics. I'm gonna limit it to like one question. So, the next thing I want to talk about is like actual content and the stuff that like content, like physically, like the stuff that you put out. I'm big on the idea of like documenting versus creating. So the reason I wanted to do this 365 days straight is quantity, quantity, quantity first, and then figure out the quality. So I'm documenting my journey of everything that I'm learning, the stuff that I'm talking every single day. For you specifically, like moving forward, do you lean more towards like do you like sit down, plan stuff out, like script it out and like fully like create it, or do you just like have thoughts and read things and be like, okay, cool, I'm just gonna document my thoughts on this?
This is so weird, the questions you're asking me today, because they're literally like everything from the conversation I was having with my friend earlier today, from like what am I struggling with to this like very question. Yeah, no, I'm an intuitive creator. So like as much as I want to be like the content batching girly who has like the day of the week and she films, it's not in me.
Yeah.
I pick up the phone and I do it and I hit publish. And
Yeah.
it's really that simple.
Yeah, 1000%. Awesome. And then um I think that's the best way to create content though, cuz in those intuitive moments when everything's just like coming and clicking, that's when you can fully create. And if you're comfortable, I want to talk about a little bit about your business briefly, because I think it's super cool. I know you do like the coaching and speaking engagements, and I'm still, you know, super early in this journey of like even starting to think of this as like a business, like in the long term, because there's just some stuff I gotta, you know, understand and do. Like if you're comfortable sharing again, at what point did you feel like you were ready to start charging for like any sort of services that you're giving? And the thing that I struggle with is like feeling like I have the competency to actually teach someone something, right? So like how did you get to that point and when did you know that, okay, Nista, I can teach someone something and charge this price?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I think one, enough people don't ask that, and two, this is my first time being asked that on a podcast. So my first time, I had those exact fears when I decided to establish myself as a coach. That really came from just a ton of people DMing me, being like, "Yo, I have this question. Yo, I need your help," and I was like, okay, I can eventually start charging for this. Cool. But I didn't feel like ready, right, at that point in time. So I'm like, let me just work with people one-on-one for X amount of time, do like 5 sessions each with them, see what results they get, have them write me testimonials, and then go from there. So I was working with a lot of people for free. I was just getting on calls with people, and the results that were happening were insane. This one girl changed her major to something she was really passionate about after her parents were like not really supportive of it and pushing her down a certain path. She changed her major from bio to psych, decided she didn't want to be a doctor anymore. Another client got out of a long-term relationship and is now actually happily in a new healthy relationship. So these things were happening, and I was like, okay, cool, let me just put a rate on it. And so I put a very low rate in the coaching industry on what I was charging for an hour. This was maybe timeline wise, I want to say this was in August. I had started making content in March. And then I think I started charging. My first client paid was either September or October. So it was like a 6 to 8 month journey until I started even offering free things. I think maybe, like I said, 7, 8 months in, I was like charging. I would have to go back to the exact dates. But I don't think I would have charged if I hadn't noticed the results from like the free, sessions I was doing. So
Gotcha.
yeah, it was a very meager rate. And then I only went up way later, like the next year, because it was just client after client, and the results were insane. And at that point, I was building up my personal credentials in terms of, TEDx, Barnes and Noble. So I had more things under my belt to be able to sell myself on a higher rate. And so I did that. And then, now my coaching is actually, I don't even call it coaching. I actually call it just manifestation mentorships. It's very
Awesome.
specific, very short. If people want a strategy call, links in the bio, and we can just work out some kinks.
Yeah, I'll obviously, link all your stuff down below. Did you have like any like it's funny you ask this, like did you have like any mentors or anything like that in terms of like learning? Because I watch, I'm like a business nerd, right? Like I'm like because like the stuff, a lot of the stuff that we talk about, like the mindset, spirituality, and all that, it's kind of new to me. Like I've always been like business, and learning that aspect. And I've been watching podcasts on like learning how to like build like a landing page and sales and like how to actually position an offer. Did you get an understanding of like how to position an offer for you, like for your business? Like, did you do any sort of like diving into that at all?
Yeah, so I was honestly consuming more probably business content at this stage of my life than personal development. I think the personal development stuff was more of like a personal journey I was going through, and it was kind of like something I was just coming across very much in my personal life. But when I was actually creating this brand and putting myself forward, what I was actively looking for was always like the career business oriented side to it. So I was very much in that world of like, even today, a lot of my For You page on TikTok is like creating those landing pages, those sales pages, building out your offers. I had a lot of friends and networking connections I was making in the industry at this point. So I would ask them for help, like, hey, what's in your contract? And they were kind enough to even share their contract with me and things that should go in that. I was getting on calls with a lot of other professional coaches, like free discovery calls, and they would just give me like mentorship. So I was hungry for information, and I
Awesome.
was going everywhere to find it. I definitely wouldn't say business is something that comes intuitively to me. It's definitely something I've had to like teach and pick up from people. So I feel like you and I are kind of complements there.
Yeah. No, 1000%. It's because I've like before, like when I turned like 18, 19, like my first year in college, I always had this like, it was like big in like that drop shipping era, real estate, and like all that stuff you see on, Instagram, TikTok, and like I didn't take it at face value. Like I actually like wanted to learn and do that. So I tried a lot of those things, and I was like, it was like failure after failure after failure. So I was like, you know what, like doing this stuff, like podcasting is something that I really enjoy. And then I got introduced to the idea of like you can turn anything you enjoy into a business eventually if you do it for a long period of time without thinking you're like better than you are. Stuff like that.
Mhm.
So like always learning. Awesome. So all of this stuff, incredible, super amazing stuff. I want to end off the pod with 2 questions, super intricate ones for me and this podcast, because I'm sure you know everything I'm about is like figuring out and asking questions that are deep and that mean a lot to me and that I care about. What's a deep question that you've struggled to sometime find an answer to that I can explore deeply on my podcast, that I can make like a full episode on?
You're killing it with these questions. Oh my gosh, I think the deepest one that like everyone asks themselves is just like, why am I here?
I love that.
Like
That's
it almost
excellent.
it goes a level deeper than what's my purpose, but it's like what is my existence? Like what is all of this? I question that a lot. Very existential.
1000%. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you use the word I can't even say it, but but I was talking to a good friend of mine who goes to University of Michigan, and he runs like this big entrepreneurship program across the country for like ambitious people, and he talked about like this idea of like nihilism and like the idea of like what do we believe, like, and if nothing really matters, like we should just go all in our life. So super cool stuff. But yeah, the question why I'm here, like why am I here, I think it'll be fun for me to explore and then answer it for myself right on the pod, and then see what feedback I get from other people. And then the last question I have, I wanna do this thing where at the beginning of every single podcast, when I have another guest on, I want to ask them the question that you left me off with from this podcast. So what's a question that I can ask the next guest that comes into this pod? So just
Yes.
it's usually people like, the business world, just honestly my friends sometimes want to come on. So if you have just a cool question that I can start off the pod with them, that'd be great.
Oh my gosh. I mean, if you want to make it like an icebreaker question, I feel like you could even have them be like talk about their biggest quirk, or be like, what's your biggest quirk, or like the silliest thing about, or even like, I don't know if people would share this like the first second they're on the podcast, but like their most embarrassing moment. Like if you want to really crack the ice, I guess depending on how close you are with them.
I love it.
You
I
could
love
even
it.
do like,
Let's get right into it.
yeah, you can even do like green flags you look for in like friendships, because then it kind of gives you an idea of like what they like about other people, since it's like a conversational thing.
I like the way you think. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for all of this. And by the way, for all the listeners, I'm gonna leave all of Nistha's socials and her website and the book in the description of the pod. So feel free to check all that out. And you wanna shout yourself out. Where can people find you?
Yes. So my Instagram and TikTok are both at Nistha Dube. That's NISTHADUBE. My website is nistadube.com. And then podcast is on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts and YouTube now, Conversations with Nistha. And then my book is on Amazon, Beyond the Skin, Barnes & Noble, Beyond the Skin. And then you can also just see it on my website under the book tab.
I love your website, by the way. It's
Thank
incredible.
you. Oh my gosh! Shout out to ZK Designs. That's my designer.
That's awesome.
She's awesome. Yeah.
That's awesome. So yeah, I have to end off the pod. I always do this thing called the gentleman's agreement, where essentially the agreement is between like me, the person who hosts the pod, and you, my guest, and then also the people who are listening. So this is an introduction. The introduction to the gentleman's agreement is for those of you who are listening, and for Nistha, there's 3 things that you have to do, and then what I do is I give you a podcast every single day for all the listeners. That's my end of the agreement. No matter what I got to do or how hard it is, the outlining, all the work, doesn't matter. You will have a pod every day at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time. And for you guys, you got to do 3 quick things. You got to follow the pod on Spotify or wherever you guys get your podcasts. That's number 1. Number 2, you have to give it a 5-star rating. I have the saying, I've never had my heart broken, and I don't intend on having it broken. So if you want to leave me a 4 stars or anything below, that'll semi break my 4 stars I'm becoming accepting of. It won't break my heart that much, but 3 or below, it'll break my heart. And last but certainly not least, share this podcast with someone who is into the manifestation, spirituality, business, content world, and someone that can just get some sort of value out of this. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and thank you so much for Nistha for taking the time to
Thank
come on this
you.
pod. And like I always say, make sure you guys take care, tell someone that you love them, and go do something nice for someone because they deserve them. Thank you so much, Nistha. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you
Thank
guys
you.
tomorrow. Peace.